Hi, welcome back to my channel, or a very warm welcome if you're new here. My name is Sophie, and in today's video I'm going to be chatting to you about all of the books that I read in March. You may remember from my March TBR that I wanted to do Mythology March, so I only wanted to read mythology books. So I took all of my mythology books, put them into a TBR jar, and then picked the books from that jar. And I did have a good variety of picks, so I had some Greek mythology, some Asian mythology, some British mythology, and then some other mythology as well. So I did have quite a good variety of picks, although the slump from February did continue into March, so I did have a very slow start to the month reading-wise. But I did come out of that reading slump around mid-March, so I'm very much back on track with my reading, which is great. So this has meant that I didn't end up reading all of the books in my TBR, but I did still have some really good reads. In the end, I did manage to read 6 books, so that's these 6 here. So these are the ones that I'm going to talk to you about. So I started off the month with Goddess with 1,000 Faces by Jasmine Elmer, and I gave this one 4 stars. This was a very interesting anthology as it blended mythology retellings with some academic research and also some cultural discussion. So each chapter focused on a different goddess, and it started off with a short retelling of one of the major myths where these goddesses are featured, and then it dived into the historical and cultural aspects of this goddess. What I enjoyed the most about this one is there were a variety of goddesses, so it didn't necessarily touch on all of the well-known goddesses, although some of them were in here. There were also quite a lot of unknown goddesses, or perhaps unknown to me. And I did love finding out more about these goddesses, although I would say that some of these were more interesting to me than others. But it does focus on a wide range of goddesses from around the world, so it wasn't just focused on one geographic centre either, which I thought was great. So I would recommend this one as a starting point if you're looking to learn a bit more about goddesses that you may be unfamiliar with. And there's also a lot of academic references in here, so that you can do more research yourself. So yeah, I thought this was a really good entry point into mythology. So next up I have Cleopatra by Saara El-Arifi, and for some reason this ended up taking me around 12 days to read, which is a little bit unusual for me, but it's no reflection on my thoughts of the book, and this was really the point where the slump was still slumping in March. I did actually really enjoy this, and I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. So I did realise going into this book that actually I didn't have a lot of knowledge about Cleopatra at all. And this novel really made me want to find out more about her, and really made me want to do more in-depth research and look up everything that I was reading. Although I did feel that the author kind of assumed a lot more prior knowledge about Cleopatra than I had, and I think perhaps more knowledge than the average reader would have about her. But what I loved about this novel was that the character of Cleopatra was not written as this perfect woman who was on some kind of moral high ground and who was wronged by men, but she does talk a lot about her flaws and she makes mistakes. She feels guilt and regret and does acknowledge her own ruthfulness and cruelty at times during the novel. I also did really like the way that Saara El-Arifi had decided to tell Cleopatra's narrative. So it was written as almost a memoir. So we have Cleopatra talking to us from the grave, which I thought was a very interesting way to approach this retelling. So it did feel very much like Cleopatra was telling her life story, and she suddenly had memories about specific things that had happened in her life. But I do feel like at times there was a lot of foreshadowing, which kind of spoiled some of the plot points if you weren't aware of what happened, and also kind of took you a little bit out of the story for a while. So it was a little bit jarring to be kind of caught up in the narrative and then suddenly being brought back to Cleopatra talking to us. But overall, I really loved this. I felt like I was definitely transported to ancient Egypt. And I think this book has really rekindled a love of ancient Egypt that I used to have as a child. And now I definitely want to dive deeper into ancient Egyptian mythology, and then also decided that I would like at some point to go on a Nile cruise. So that's not going to happen for a while, but at some point I would like to go and discover more about ancient Egypt in Egypt. I did also really love the fantastical elements in this, so there was some sprinkling of magical realism in this, And it was great also to learn a little bit more about some of the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians and how they were kind of very much tied to gods and goddesses. And this one did focus on a lot of different aspects of Cleopatra's life. So her relationship with her siblings, and then her rise to power, and then her reign, and also her relationships during her reign and the ideas of the people towards her. But yeah, I don't know what it was, but something about this novel really spoke to me, and I did have a really good time with it. And honestly, I'm not going to give it away, but this ending had me in tears, and I just thought it was so beautifully done and so beautifully written. Although I felt maybe we could have had a little bit more expansion on the ending. We could have lingered a little bit longer in that section. And then I got on to the ancient Greeks. So sadly, I didn't manage to read the Iliad in March, although I did start it. I think I've got about 100 pages through. But I just decided that I didn't want to rush this. I want to take my time with it. I want to really understand what I'm reading. And there's also a lot of supporting notes. And I like to do a little bit more research while I'm reading it. So this one, although I didn't finish it in March, I did start it, and I will just be reading it until I eventually manage to finish it. But I would hope that in the next few months I can finish reading this one, as I really want to get to the Odyssey as well, because there is a new film adaptation of that coming out in the summer. So I would like to have both the Iliad and the Odyssey read by the time I go and see that. But I did read some of the other ancient Greek texts. So I did read Hesiod, Theogony and Works and Days, and Theognis Elegies. So this one was quite interesting. I'm not really sure how to rate these ancient texts. It doesn't really feel like I can use the same kind of star rating for these as I would with other books. It's also a little bit difficult to rate this book, as it felt very much of different parts, and I think there's also evidence to suggest that this wasn't all written by Hesiod. So I did really enjoy Theogony. So this is basically a very long poem, and Hesiod just shoves all of the characters from myth that he can possibly put in this one poem. So it is very informative from that perspective. So it starts with the Titans and then the Olympians, and then carries on from there. Then we have Works and Days, which is basically a farmer's almanac. And Hesiod wrote this for his brother to teach him how to work in agriculture, and also lots of tips about having a wife. And yeah, there were some parts that were very jarring for a modern reader. So yeah, this concerns about having a wife, and yeah, I will read it to you because it was something that I was just like, what? So it says, bring home a wife when you are ripe for it, when you are 30, not much more nor less. That is the proper age for marrying. Your wife should have matured 4 years before and marry in the 5th year. So I'm pretty sure that means that you should be 30 when you have a wife, and your wife should be a teenager. So yeah, some great advice from Hesiod. And then we have Elegies, which was just kind of small snippets of text and poems, which were talking about various aspects of mythology and just general tips for life. So yeah, I didn't really enjoy that so much. I definitely would recommend Theogony if you want to read a little bit more about Hesiod's perspective on mythological characters. And then I read Euripides, Medea and Other Plays, and actually I enjoyed this so much more than I ever thought that I would enjoy it. So Medea specifically, I really loved this. I loved Euripides' take on Medea, and it was such a powerful play. So obviously this is meant to be performed, so it doesn't really do it justice to just read it as the text. But I would now love to really see this performed. Sadly, I did miss a production of this in the West End, and I wish I had gone to see that. But I think Medea is performed quite a lot. So if you don't have a lot of knowledge about Medea, she is a witch figure from Greek mythology, and she is well known for marrying Jason and helping him retrieve the Golden Fleece, and then also for murdering her children. So this play basically starts when Medea finds out that Jason is leaving her and he is taking another wife who is the princess. So he has basically made a fool of Medea, and she is trying to think of a way to get revenge on Jason for what he has done to her. And it really is just full of drama and despair, and yeah, it's all very dramatic. Then also in this collection there's 3 more plays by Euripides. So Hecate, Electra, and then Heracles. I did really love Medea, and then I also really loved the play Hecate. And yeah, I didn't really know much about her. So she is Queen of Troy, and when Troy falls, most of her children are dead, and she is then taken as a slave by Agamemnon. And she is basically being driven mad by all of the bad things that have happened to her. And I think it really sheds the light on her as a woman and a victim of war. So yeah, I really did not think that I would enjoy this as much as I did. So I would love to read more of Euripides' plays. Then I did read some British mythology, so I read Sister Song by Lucy Holland, and this has been sitting on my TBR for about 4 years now, so I am so glad that I finally got to it, and just a bit annoyed that I didn't pick it up sooner, as I did really enjoy this one, so I gave this 4 stars. And this is a retelling of an old British folk ballad called Two Sisters, which is actually a very dark tale, and it's about jealousy between two sisters who are in love with the same man. And I don't want to go into much more detail about the ballad, as it is quite a key plot point for this book, and I wouldn't want to spoil that for you. In some variations of this tale, there is also a third sister, and Lucy Holland has brought to life these 3 siblings and given them all a voice. So each chapter is from the point of view of one of these siblings, and they're all given their own story arc. So we have Riva, who is the oldest daughter, and she was severely burned in an accident which she doesn't remember a lot of, and she also has the ability to heal, but for some reason she's not able to heal herself. Then we have Keen, who's very much struggling with their identity, so born a girl but really wanting to find acceptance and really feeling like they are the king's son, so very much dealing with this struggle with identity. And it was really interesting to see trans representation in this book. Then we have Sina, the youngest daughter, and she is seeking a life of adventure. She wants to see the world and she wants to find love. So this is set in ancient Britain, and it's set in the time period when the Romans have left and just at the start of the arrival of the Saxons. And this is set in a semi-fictional kingdom who are trying to fight off the Saxon advances. This is also a very interesting time in history, as Christianity is starting to sweep the country and starting to replace all of the traditional pagan belief systems. So this novel also did blend kind of historical fiction with also some fantasy and magical elements. And I did love how much folklore was in this book, and how there was also mention of pagan Sabbats. So it started with Imbolc in February, and then went right through the calendar to Yule, which is in December. And I really love that aspect. I felt that this one was very atmospheric, it was very lyrical and beautifully written, and really discussed a lot of themes. So we have gender identity, the role of women at this time in history, also the Christianity versus paganism, and also this family and sister/sibling relationship. So the majority of this book is set before the folk ballad of the Two Sisters. So that plot point comes right towards the end of the book, and it is just heartbreaking. I think the only thing I would say is it did feel a little bit of a slow burn. It was quite slow to build, and sometimes I would have liked to have spent a little bit longer in each of the point of views before switching to the next one. But I'm now eager to pick up the other book that I have of Lucy Holland, which I think is called Songs of the Huntress. So I would like to prioritise reading that soon, as I had a really good time with this one. Then the final book that I read in March is Sweet Bitter Song by Rosie Hewlett. I adored this novel, and it was a very easy 5 stars, and this makes all of Rosie Hewlett's books 5-star reads for me. So this could be described as a sapphic retelling of the Iliad and the Odyssey. So it crosses over the time before the men went to battle in the Iliad, and then also the events of the Odyssey. And this tells a story of Penelope, Princess of Sparta, and Melantho, a slave girl. So these two form a very deep friendship when they're younger, and this turns into something more when they're older. So I have to say that I hadn't actually heard of Melantho before I read this, as I'm still very much still discovering the Homeric text. So she is one of the slaves and handmaidens in the Odyssey. But I think Rosie Hewlett has done a really good job of focusing on the lives of slaves at this period of ancient history. So while this does focus on mythological characters, it really does spotlight the slaves in this story. So at times there are very brutal and heartbreaking events that happen in this, and that did make it quite a difficult read at times. And also there's a lot about the mistreatment of women, but I love how Rosie has written these really powerful female characters, and sometimes they end up using their position in society to their advantage. And I love in this novel how we finally see Penelope from a female perspective rather than a male perspective, and I thought that was a really interesting aspect of this novel. So Penelope a lot of the times is seen as this very dutiful wife who waits for her husband for 20 years while he's in battle, and then really struggles to find his way home, ending up in the beds of various witches and other women. But we do really see more aspects to Penelope's character. She is very clever and she's very good at manipulating the men in this story. So I thought that this was just beautiful and lyrical writing, and Rosie Hewlett really does bring this ancient Greece to life. I really felt like I was transported to this world and to the island of Ithaca. So this is told through various timelines. So we start when Penelope and Melantho are younger. So this is before Penelope is married to Odysseus. Then it shifts timeline to a bit later, during the time when Helen's husband is chosen, and also that results in Penelope marrying Odysseus. Then the men go to war, and we actually don't focus on the time period of what happens when they're at war. It's more when the war is over and the men are making their return that we then go back to see what is happening in Ithaca. So whilst I would have loved to see a lot more of what happened during that time, it was a very long time. So I think this novel would have probably been even longer than the Iliad or the Odyssey. But it was really interesting to see how during that time Ithaca was run by Penelope and women were carrying out all the tasks that men would have usually done. But the ending really broke my heart, and I really can see why it's been given the title Sweet Bitter Song. So I definitely recommend this if you enjoy mythology retellings. So that was all of the books that I read in March. I feel like I'm now back on track with my reading, so hopefully in April I will be reading a lot more. So if you want to see the books that I'm reading in April, do check out my April TBR. I am also participating in the Magical Readathon this month. Please do leave me a comment and let me know what you read in March and what your favourite read of the month was. Thank you for watching. Please do like this video if you enjoyed it, and also subscribe to my channel for more of my content, and I'll see you next time.